So I'll be talking about the fourth variation in this caprice. For me, this fourth variation is much like a lot of Paganini's music. It's very devilish and very mystical in character, almost ghostly. But there's also this very human element to it. And what I mean is when there's the descending chromatic scales and then the rising up octaves, it for me sounds like and feels like a struggle. And much like life, you fall down, but you pick yourself up again and you keep going. And at the very end of this variation, it jumps up 2 octaves, which is very clearly written in his manuscript. And it launches into the next variation. So it just shows if you keep trying and try harder, you'll get there. And when you're playing Paganini, I feel like it's very important to remember who he was and think about that. He was a very creative person. He was a performer. He was a huge risk taker. And I don't think that you should hold back that side of you and try and just play all the notes correctly. For example, I saw this video on Instagram the other day of Tessa Lark playing this variation, and she decided to do all the chromatics with one finger. And I just thought that was so great because Paganini probably would have loved that. He probably would have done it himself. And I just think don't lock your creative side when you play his music. I mean, any music, but this risk-taking element is so important in his pieces. But apart from that, some of the difficulties in this caprice are the chromatics. They change pattern at times, and therefore the fingering combination changes. It's not the same fingering all the time. And to get used to that, I like to practice it with slow bow separately and just get my hands used to the pattern, because sometimes you don't have time to think about the fingering, and I think it makes it much easier if your hands just do the work for you, and you can then explore the colors and the different characters in this variation.
Hey y'all, I am Tessa Lark, and I'll be honest with you, I would be totally fine if I never had to play another Paganini Caprice in my life. But there's nothing more thrilling than conquering one of these bad boys and making it sound like the great music it is in the process. I also find it really satisfying to find my way into things that don't come naturally to me. And in this case, that is virtuosic music. As soon as I think of music as something purely technical, I tend to tense up and eat dirt on the concert stage. So my way into Paganini Caprices is to focus on the major wealth of characters that are inherent in the caprices, and also focus on the improvisatory nature that is in all of Paganini's music. He was known to be a master improviser. There's even legend that he was playing for the King of Sardinia, something that was so amazing that the king wanted to hear it again, and Paganini told him, "No, I don't repeat things." And the king did not want to hear that, so he expelled Paganini from Sardinia for 2 years. But the part of that story that I like to focus on is the fact that Paganini improvised. He never repeated himself. And that anecdote indicates to me that we can be taking liberties when we perform Paganini's caprices and look a little bit off the page. You could argue that because these are caprices, they're etudes, you should focus on what is written and focus on the techniques in the caprices. That's fine, that's totally valid, but I feel since we violinists have made these etudes into performance pieces, we should implement Paganini's performance practices when we play them, and that includes improvisation. I implemented 3 different types of improv in that performance of Variation 11 that I'll talk to you about. The first and most common way of thinking about improvising is simply playing different notes. Paganini improvised just like a jazz player. He never changed the structure or harmonic form of his music. He would improvise on the form. So that's what I did. And to pick my improvisations, I was picking from different things that Paganini has written. So in the repeat of the first part of the variation, I used ricochet, which you find in Paganini's first caprice. I used scales, which you find everywhere, which you should find in your daily practice. If you practice scales and arpeggios every day, those are great tools to use in improvisation if you're just getting into it. I also used a bow staccato. I was using things that I figured Paganini was kind of sneaking in his improvs in his concerts. The second thing I did was to simply exaggerate the features of this variation. One of the biggest features, I think, in Variation 11 is the contrary motion. You have these really strong, broken quadruple stops, very grounded and powerful, that move down, and then you have these super virtuosic scales and arpeggios upward. And so what I did sometimes in my improvisation was simply exaggerate those changes. So instead of, I exaggerated this leap and went up an octave, and instead of an arpeggio down, I expanded the descent another octave. So that was another type of improvisation I used. The third type of improv, some people argue that this is not improvisation, but I argue this is a great way into improvisation type brain for those of you who are not familiar with improvising, and that is to utilize the techniques at your disposal to vary and change up the way that you're playing the variation. So that would be things like dynamics, like tempo, rubato, vibrato, even different fingerings and bowings than are what are on the page. I think that's all valid stuff. So there are some untraditional fingerings that I was using, like this one, shift up to the harmonic. I think those are really fun. And speaking of contrary motion, maybe sometimes you crescendo up an arpeggio, maybe sometimes you decrescendo. And if you practice different ways of interpreting these variations in advance and then improvise which one you pick on the stage, you'll still get that feeling of improvisation and sort of flight of fancy on stage, and that'll get you into this improvisation headspace, and you'll be well on your way. So I hope that helps. That's my way into the caprices, and just a little reminder, as you're working hard, don't forget to find the fun and the incredible characters that are all over the caprices. So enjoy!